guys, I can indeed read. And we found ourselves back once again in the dungeon. We're going to be reading some more fairy tales today because we have nothing else to do. And actually, I think the first fairy tale we're going to read today will be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There's a lot of jokes I'd like to make about this. Unfortunately, they don't have the Snow Brown and the seven magical creatures out yet. But, that's okay. Maybe there'll be another part of this video someday. Anywho, I was just kind of curious what the actual story is about because I've never, really read any of the Grimm's fairy tales myself. So today let's check out what is actually in it together. Also, I found that I think it's more fun to sort of change from a whispery voice to a regular speaky voice like this. Just because I like the variety, and two, I think it's easier on my voice personally because I find that if I just do one or the other for the entire time, I get really tired and I want to yawn constantly, or my voice gets sore and I need to take breaks or get drinks of water and whatnot. And I just want to make this as easy on myself as possible because I think that makes it easier on you guys as possible. I seem to, skip less words or mumble less if I'm just, more at ease. But anyway, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was the middle of winter, and the snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, and a queen sat at her window working, and her embroidery frame was of ebony. And as she worked, gazing at times out on the snow, she pricked her finger, and there fell from it 3 drops of blood on the snow. And when she saw how bright and red it looked, she said to herself, "Oh, that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the embroidery frame." Not very long after she had a daughter, with a skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony, and she was named Snow White. And when she was born, the queen died. After a year had gone by, the king took another wife, a beautiful woman, but proud and overbearing, and she could not bear to be surpassed in beauty by anyone. She had a magic looking-glass, and she used to stand before it and look in it and say, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the looking-glass would answer, "You are fairest of them all." And she was contented, for she knew that the looking-glass spoke the truth. Now Snow White was growing prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as day, far more so than the queen herself. So one day, when the queen went to the mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" it answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White fairer is than you." This gave the queen a great shock, and she became yellow and green with envy. And from that hour her heart turned against Snow White, and she hated her. And envy and pride, like ill weeds, grew in her heart higher every day, until she had no peace day or night. At last she sent for a huntsman and said, "Take the child out into the woods, so that I may set eyes on her no more. You must put her to death, and bring me her heart for a token." The huntsman consented and led her away. But when he drew his cutlass to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep and to say, "Oh, dear huntsman, do not take my life. I will go away into wild woods and never come home again." And as she was so lovely, the huntsman had pity on her and said, "Away with you then, poor child." For he thought the wild animals would be sure to devour her, and it was as if a stone had just been rolling away from his heart when he did not put her to death. Just at that moment a young wild boar came running by, so he caught and killed it, and taking out its heart, he brought it to the queen for a token, and it was salted and cooked, and the wicked woman ate it up, thinking that there was an end of Snow White. Now when the poor child found herself quite alone in the wild woods, she felt full of terror, even of the very leaves on the trees, and she did not know what to do for fright. Then she began to run over the sharp stones and through the thorn bushes, and the wild beasts after her, but they did no harm. She ran as long as her feet would carry her, and when the evening drew, she came to a little house, and she went inside to rest. Everything there was very small, but as pretty and clean as possible. There stood the little table ready laid, and covered with a white cloth, and 7 little plates, and 7 knives and forks and drinking cups. By the wall stood 7 little beds, side by side, covered with clean white quilts. Snow White, being very hungry and thirsty, ate from each plate a little porridge and bread, and drank out of each little cup a drop of wine, so as not to finish up one portion alone. After that, she felt so tired that she lay down on one of the beds, but it did not seem to suit her. One was too long, another too short, but at last the 7th was quite right, and so she lay down upon it, committed herself to heaven, and fell asleep. When it was quite dark, the masters of the house came home. They were 7 dwarfs, whose occupation was to dig underground among the mountains. When they had lighted their 7 candles, and it was quite light in the house, they saw that someone must have been in, and as everything was not in the same order in which they left it, the first said, "Who has been sitting in my little chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating from my little plate?" The third said, "Who has been taking from my little loaf?" The fourth said, "Who has been tasting from my porridge?" The fifth said, "Who has been using my little fork?" The sixth said, "Who has been cutting with my little knife?" The seventh said, "Who has been drinking from my little cup?" Then the first one, looking round, saw a hollow in his bed, and cried, "Who has been lying on my bed?" And the others came running and cried, "Someone has been on our beds too." Then when the 7th looked at his bed, he saw little Snow White lying there asleep. Then he told the others, who came running up, crying out in their astonishment, and holding up their 7 little candles to throw light upon Snow White. "Oh, goodness so gracious!" cried they. "What beautiful child is this?" And were so full of joy to see her that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on. And the 7th dwarf slept with his comrades, an hour at a time, until the night had passed. When it was morning, and Snow White awoke and saw the 7 dwarfs, she was very frightened, but they seemed quite friendly and asked her what her name was, and she told them. And then they asked how she came to be in their house, and she related to them how her stepmother had wished to be put to death, and how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run the whole day long until at last she had found their little house. Then the dwarf said, "If you will keep our house for us, and cook and wash and make the beds, and sew and knit and keep everything tidy and clean, you may stay with us, and you shall lack nothing." "With all my heart," said Snow White, and so she stayed and kept the house. "With all my heart," said Snow White, and so she stayed and kept the house in good order. In the morning the dwarfs went to the mountain to dig for gold. In the evening they came home, and their supper had to be ready for them. All the day long the maiden was left alone, and the good little dwarfs warned her, saying, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon know you are here. Let no one into the house." Now the queen, having eaten Snow White's heart, as she supposed, felt quite sure that now she was the first and fairest, and so she came to the mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, And the glass answered, Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair. Then she was very angry, for the glass always spoke the truth, and she knew that the huntsman must have deceived her, and that Snow White must still be living. And she thought and thought how she could manage to make an end of her, for as long as she was not the fairest in the land, envy left her no rest. At last she thought of a plan. She painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, so that no one would have known her. In this disguise she went across the 7 mountains until she came to the house of the 7 little dwarfs, and she knocked at the door and cried, Fine wares to sell, fine wares to sell. Snow White peeped out at the window and cried, good day, woman, what have you to sell? Good wares, fine wares, answered she, laces of all colors, and she held up a piece that was woven of variegated silk. I need not be afraid of letting in this good woman, thought Snow White, and she unbarred the door and brought the pretty lace. What a figure you are, child, said the old woman. Come and let me lace you properly for once. Snow White, suspecting nothing, stood up before her, and let her lace her with the new lace, but the old woman laced so quickly and tightly that it took Snow White's breath away, and she fell down as dead. Oh my God, she's dead. Really? Now you have done with being the fairest, said the old woman as she hastened away. Not long after that, towards evening, the 7 dwarfs came home, and were terrified to see their dead Snow White lying on the ground. Without life or motion, they raised her up, and when they saw how tightly she was laced, they cut the lace in 2, and then she began to draw breath, and little by little she returned to life. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, The old peddler woman was no other than the wicked queen. You must beware of letting anyone in when we are not here. And the wicked woman got home. She went to her glass and said, Looking glass against the wall, who is the fairest of all? And it answered as before, Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair. When she heard that, she was so struck with surprise that all the blood left her heart, for she knew that Snow White must still be living. But now, she said, I will think of something that will be her ruin. And by witchcraft she made a poisoned comb. She then dressed herself up to look like another different sort of woman. So she went across the 7 mountains and came to the house of the 7 dwarfs, and knocked at the door and cried, Good wares to sell, good wares to sell. Snow White looked out and said, Go away, I must not let anybody in. But you are not forbidden to look, said the old woman, taking out the poisoned comb and holding it up. It pleased the poor child so much that she was tempted to open the door, but when the bargain was made, the old woman said, Now for once your hair shall properly be combed. Poor Snow White, thinking no harm, let the old woman do as she would. But no sooner was the comb put in her hair than the poison began to work, and the poor girl fell down senseless. Now, you paragon of beauty, said the wicked woman, this is the end of you, and went off. By good luck it was now near evening, and the 7 little dwarfs came home. When they saw Snow White lying on the ground as dead, they thought directly that it was the stepmother's doing, and looked about, found the poisoned comb, and no sooner had they drawn it out of her the hair than Snow White came to life, and related all that had passed. Then they warned her once more to be on her guard, and never again let anyone in at the door. And the queen went home and stood before the looking glass and said, Looking glass against the wall, who is fairest of us all? And the looking glass answered as before, Dog City never sleeps. When she heard the looking glass speak thus, she trembled and shook with anger. Snow White shall die, cried she, though it should cost me my own life. And then she went to a secret lonely chamber where no one was likely to come, and there she made a poisonous apple. It was beautiful to look upon, being white with red cheeks, so that anyone who should see it must long for it, but whoever ate even a little bit of it must die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and clothed herself like a peasant woman,
and went across the 7 mountains to where the 7 dwarfs lived. And when she knocked at the door, Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anybody in. The 7 dwarfs told me not to."
"All right,"
answered the woman.
"I can easily get rid of my apples elsewhere. There, I will give you one."
"No," answered Snow White, "I dare not take anything."
"Are you afraid of poison?"
said the woman.
"Look here. I will cut the apple in 2 pieces. You shall have the red slice, and I shall have the white one."
For the apple was so cunningly made that all the poison was in the rosy half of it. Snow White longed for the beautiful apple, and as she saw the peasant woman eating a piece of it, she could no longer refrain, but stretched out her hand and took off the poison half. But no sooner had she taken a morsel of it into her mouth than she fell to the earth as dead. And the queen, casting on her a terrible glance, laughed aloud and cried,
"As white as snow, as red as blood, as black as ebony, this time the dwarves will not be able to bring you to life again."
And when she went home and asked the looking glass,
"Looking glass against the wall, who is the fairest of the all?"
at last it answered,
"You are the fairest now of all."
Then her envious heart had peace, as much as an envious heart can have. The dwarfs, when they came home again in the evening, found Snow White lying on the ground, and there came no breath out of her mouth, and she was dead. The dwarfs really should have taken this as a hint that Snow White was a deadly fellow to have around, and they probably shouldn't be keeping her this long. But they lifted her up, sought if anything poisonous was to be found, cut her laces, combed her hair, washed her face with water and wine, but all was of no avail. The poor child was dead and remained dead. Then they laid her on a bier, and sat all 7 of them round it, and wept and lamented 3 whole days. And they would not have buried her, but that she looked still as if she were living, with her beautiful blooming cheeks. So they said,
"We cannot hide her away in the black ground."
And they had made a coffin of clear glass, so as to be looked on from all sides, and they laid her in it, and wrote in golden letters upon its name, and that she was a king's daughter. Then they set the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always remained by it to watch. And the birds came too, and mourned for Snow White, first an owl, then a raven, and lastly a dove. Now for a long while Snow White lay in the coffin and never changed, but looked as if she were asleep, for she was still white as snow, as red as blood, and hair was as black as ebony. It happened, however, that one day a king's son rode through this wood, and up to the dwarf's house, which was near it. He saw on the mountain the coffin, the beautiful Snow White, within, and read what was written in golden letters upon it. Then he said to the dwarves,
"Let me have the coffin, and I will give you whatever you like to ask for it."
But the dwarfs told him that they could not part with it for all the gold in the world. But he said,
"I beseech you, give it to me, for I cannot live without looking upon Snow White. If you consent, I will bring you to great honor, and care for you as if you were my brethren."
When he so spoke, the good little dwarfs had pity upon him, and gave him the coffin. And the king's son called his servants, and bid them carry it away on their shoulders. Now it happened that as they were going along, they stumbled over a bush, and with the shaking the bit of poison apple flew out of her throat. It was not long before she opened her eyes, threw up the cover of the coffin, and sat up, alive and well. "Oh dear, where am I?" cried she. The king's son answered full of joy, "You are near me." And relating all that had happened, he said, "I would rather have you than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's castle, and you shall be my bride." And Snow White was kind, and went with him, and their wedding was held with pomp and splendor. But Snow White's wicked stepmother was also bidden to the feast, and when she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, she went to her looking glass and said,
"Looking glass upon the wall, who is the fairest of us all?"
The looking glass answered,
"O Queen, although you are of beauty rare, the young bride is 1,000 times more fair."
Then she railed and cursed, and was beside herself with disappointment and anger. First she thought she would not go to the wedding, but then she felt she should have no peace until she went and saw the bride. And when she saw her, she knew her for Snow White, and could not stir from the place of anger and terror. For they had ready red-hot irons What? Sorry for the pause here. I read the last sentence and I was just confused. And when she saw her, she knew her for Snow White and could not stir from the place of anger and terror. But then this last line, for they had ready red-hot iron shoes in which she had to dance until she fell down dead. Where did that come from? Okay, I see the next story here is the shoes that were danced to pieces. Some of these do kind of seem to link together. I don't really know what's going on here, but let's read the shoes that were danced to pieces.
There was once upon a time. Sorry, I'm just used to the once upon a time. So these tend to be worded differently. There was once upon a time a king who had 12 daughters, each one more beautiful than the other. They all slept together in one chamber, in which their beds stood side by side, and every night when they were in them, the king locked the door and bolted it. But in the morning when he unlocked the door, he saw that their shoes were worn out with dancing, and no one could find out how that had come to pass. Then the king caused it to be proclaimed that whosoever could discover why they were danced at night should choose one of them for his wife and be king after his death, but that whosoever came forward and had not discovered it within 3 days and nights should have forfeited his life. It was not long before a king's son presented himself and offered to undertake the enterprise. He was well received, and in the evening was led into a room adjoining the princess's sleeping chamber. His bed was placed there, and he was to observe where they went and danced, and in order that they might do nothing secretly or go away to some other place, the door of their room was left open. But the eyelids of the prince grew heavy as lead, and he fell asleep, and when he awoke in the morning, all 12 had been to the dance, and their shoes were standing with their holes in their soles. On the second and third nights it fell out just the same, and then his head was struck off without mercy. Many others came after this, and undertook the enterprise, but all forfeited their lives. Now it came to pass that a poor soldier who had a wound, and could serve no longer, found himself on the road to the town where the king lived. There he met an old woman, who asked him where he was going. I hardly know myself, answered he, and added in jest, I had half a mind to discover where the princesses danced their shoes into holes, and thus become king. That is not so difficult, said the old woman. You must not drink the wine which will be brought to you at night, and must pretend to be sound asleep. With that, she gave him a little cloak and said, if you put on that, you will be invisible, and then you can steal after the 12. When the soldier had received this good advice, he went into the thing in earnest, took heart, went to the king, and announced himself as a suitor. He was as well received as the others, and royal garments were put upon him. He was conducted that evening at bedtime into the antechamber, and as he was about to go to bed, the eldest came and brought him a cup of wine, but he had tied a sponge under his chin and let the wine run down into it without drinking a drop. Then he lay down, and when he had lain a while, he began to snore as if in the deepest sleep. The 12 princesses heard that and laughed, and the eldest said, he too might as well have saved his life. With that they got up, opened wardrobes, presses, cupboards, and brought out pretty dresses, dressed themselves before the mirrors, sprang about, and rejoiced at the prospect of the dance. Only the youngest said, I know not how it is, you are very happy, but I feel strange. Some misfortune is certainly about to befall us. You are a goose who is always frightened, said the eldest. Have you forgotten how many kings' sons have already come in here in vain? I had hardly any need to give the soldier a sleeping draught. In any case, the clown would not have awakened. When they were all ready, they looked carefully at the soldier, but he had closed his eyes and did not move or stir, so they felt themselves quite secure. The eldest then went to her bed and taped it. It immediately sank to the earth, and one after the other they descended through the opening, the eldest going first. The soldier, who had watched everything, tarried no longer, put on his little cloak and went down last with the youngest. Halfway down the steps, he just trod a little on her dress. She was terrified at that and cried out, "Who is that? Who is pulling at my dress?" "Don't be so silly," said the eldest. "You have caught it on the nail." They went down all the way, and when they were at the bottom, they were standing in a wonderfully pretty avenue of trees, all the leaves of which were silver and shone and glistened. The soldier thought, "I must carry a token away with me," and broke off a twig from one of them, on which the tree cracked with a loud report. The youngest cried out again, "Something is wrong, did you hear the crack?" But the eldest said, "It is a gun fired for joy, because we have gotten rid of our prince so quickly." After that they came into an avenue where all the leaves were gold, and lastly into a third avenue where they were of bright diamonds. He broke off a twig from each, which made such a crack each time that the youngest stared back in terror, but the eldest still maintained that they were salutes. They went on and came to a great lake, whereon stood 12 little boats, and in every boat sat a handsome prince, all of whom were waiting for the 12, and each took one of them with him, but the soldier seated himself by the youngest. Then her prince said, "I can't tell why the boat is so much heavier today. I shall have to row with all my strength if I am to get across." "What should cause that?" said the youngest. "But the warm weather. I feel very warm too." On the opposite side of the lake stood a splendid, brightly lit castle, from whence resounded the joyous music of trumpets and kettle drums. They rowed over there, entered, and each prince danced with the girl he loved, but the soldier danced with them unseen. And when one of them had a cup of wine in her hand, he drank it up, so that the cup was empty when she carried it to her mouth. The youngest was alarmed at this, but the eldest always made her be silent. They danced there till 3 o'clock in the morning, when all the shoes were danced in the holes, and they were forced to leave off. The princes rowed them back again over the lake, and this time the soldier seated himself by the eldest. On the shore they took leave of their princes, and promised to return the following night. When they reached the stairs, the soldier ran on in front and lay down in his bed, and when the 12 had come up slowly and warily, he was already snoring so loudly that they could hear all him, and they said, "So far as he is concerned, we are safe." They took off their beautiful dresses, laid them away, put the worn-out shoes under the bed, and lay down. Next morning the soldier was resolved not to speak, but to watch the wonderful going-ons, and again went with them. Everything was done just as had been done by the first time, and each time they danced until their shoes were torn to pieces. But the third time he took a cup away with him as a token. When the hour had arrived for him to give his answer, he took the 3 twigs and the cup and went to the king. But the 12 stood behind the door and listened for what he was going to say. When the king put the question, "Where have my 12 daughters danced their shoes to pieces in the night?" he answered, "In an underground castle with 12 princes," and related how it had come to pass and brought out the tokens. The king then summoned his daughters and asked them if the soldier had told the truth, and when they saw that they were betrayed, and that falsehood would be of no avail, they were obliged to confess all. Thereupon the king asked which of them he would have to wife. He answered, "I am no longer young, so give me the eldest." Then the wedding was celebrated on the same day, and the kingdom was promised him after the king's death. But the princes were bewitched for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12.
The boots of buffalo leather. A soldier who is afraid of nothing troubles himself about nothing. One of this kind had received his discharge, and as he had learnt no trade and could earn nothing, he traveled about and begged alms of kind people. He had an old waterproof on his back, and a pair of riding boots of buffalo leather which were still left to him. One day he was walking, he knew not where, straight out into the open country, and at length came to a forest. He did not know when he was, but saw sitting on the trunk of a tree, which had been cut down, a man who was well dressed and wore a green shooting coat. The soldier shook hands with him, sat down on the grass by his side, and stretched out his legs. "I see you have good boots, which are well blacked," said he to the huntsman. "But if you had to travel about as I have, they would not last long. Look at mine. They are of buffalo leather, and have been worn for a long time, but in them I can go through thick and thin." After a while, the soldier got up and said, I can stay no longer, hunger drives me onward. But, Brother Bright Boots, where does this road lead to? I don't know that myself, answered the huntsman. I have lost my way in the forest. Then you are in the same plight as I, said the soldier. Birds of a feather flock together. Let us remain together and seek our way. The huntsman smiled a little, and they walked on farther and farther until night fell. We do not get out of the forest, said the soldier, but there in the distance I see a light shining, which will help us to find something to eat. They found a stone house, knocked at the door, and an old woman opened it. We are looking for quarters for the night, said the soldier, and some lining for our stomachs, for mine is as empty as an old knapsack. You cannot stay here, answered the old woman. This is a robber's house, and you would do wisely to get away before they come home, or you will be lost. It won't be so bad as that, answered the soldier. I have not had a mouthful for 2 days, and whether I am murdered here or die of hunger in the forest is all the same to me. I shall go in. The huntsman would not follow, but the soldier drew him in with him by the sleeve. Come, my dear brother, we shall not come to an end so quickly as that. The old woman had pity on them and said, Creep in here behind the stove, and if they leave anything, I will give it to you on the sly when they are asleep. Scarcely were they in the corner before 12 robbers came bursting in, seated themselves at the table which was already laid, and vehemently demanded some food. The old woman brought in some great dishes of roast meat, and the robbers enjoyed that thoroughly. When the smell of the food reached the nostrils of the soldier, he said to the huntsman, I cannot hold out any longer. I shall seat myself at the table and eat with them. You will bring us to destruction, said the huntsman, and held him back by the arm. But the soldier began to cough loudly. When the robbers heard that, they threw away their knives and forks, leapt up, and discovered the 2 who were behind the stove. Aha, gentlemen, are you in the corner? Cried they. What are you doing here? Have you been sent us as spies? Wait a while, and you shall learn how to fly on a dry bough. But do be civil, said the soldier. I am hungry, give me something to eat, and then you can do whatever you like to me. The robbers were astonished, and the captain said, I see that you have no fear. Well, you shall have some food, but after that you will die. We shall see, said the soldier, and seated himself at the table, and began to cut away valiantly at the roast meat. Brother Brightboots, come and eat, cried he to the huntsman. You must be as hungry as I am, and cannot have better roast meat at home. But the huntsman would not eat. The robbers looked at the soldier in astonishment, and said, The rascal uses no ceremony. After a while he said, I have had enough food, now give me something good to drink. The captain was in the mood to humor him in this also, and called to the old woman, Bring out a bottle of the cellar, and might it be of the best. The soldier drew the cork out with a loud noise, and then went with the bottle to the huntsman and said, Pay attention, brother, and you shall see something that will surprise you. I am now going to drink the health of the whole clan. Then he brandished the bottle over the heads of the robbers and cried, Long life to you all, but with your mouth open and your right hands lifted up. And then he drank a hearty draught. Scarcely were the words said than they all sat motionless as if made of stone, and their mouths were open and their right hands stretched up in the air. The huntsman said to the soldier, I see that you are acquainted with tricks of one other kind, but now come and let us go home. Oh, my dear brother, but what would be marching away far too soon? We have conquered the enemy and must first take the booty. Those men there are sitting fast and are opening their mouths with astonishment, but they will not be allowed to move until I permit them. Come, eat and drink. The old woman had to bring another bottle of the best wine, and the soldier would not stir until he had eaten enough to last for 3 days. At last, when the day came, he said, Now it is time to strike our tents, and that our march may be a short one, the old woman shall show us the nearest way to town. When they had arrived there, he went to his old comrades and said, Out in the forest I have found a nest full of gallows birds. Come with me and we will take it. The soldier led them and said to the huntsman, You must go back again with me and see how they shake when we seize them by the feet. He placed the men round about the robbers. Then he took the bottle, drank a mouthful, brandished it above them, and cried, Live again. Instantly they all regained the power of movement, but were thrown down and bound hand and foot with cords. Then the soldier ordered them to be thrown into a cart, as if they had been so many sacks, and said, "Now drive them straight to prison." The huntsman, however, took one of the men aside and gave him another commission besides. "Big Brother Brutes, Big Brother Bright Boots," said the soldier, "we have safely routed the enemy and been well fed. Now we will quietly walk beside them as if we were stragglers." When they approached the town, the soldier saw a crowd of people pouring through the gate of the town who were raising loud cries of joy and waving green boughs in the air. Then he saw the entire bodyguard was coming. "What can this mean?" said he to the huntsman. "Do you not know," he replied, "that the king has for a long time been absent from his kingdom, and that today he is returning, and everyone is going to meet him?" "But there is a king," said the soldier. "I do not see him." "Here he is," answered the huntsman. "I am the king, and have announced my arrival." Then he opened his hunting coat, and his royal garments were visible. The soldier was alarmed, and fell on his knees, and begged him to forgive him for having in his ignorance treated him as an equal, and spoken to him by such a name. But the king shook hands with him, and said, "You are a brave soldier, and have saved my life. You shall never again be in want. I will take care of you. And if ever you would like to eat a piece of roast meat as good as that in the robber's house, come to the royal kitchen. But if you would drink a health, you must first ask my permission." I actually like that. That's a cute little ending. That's fun.
This one is The Six Servants. In days of old there lived an aged queen who was a sorceress, and her daughter was the most beautiful maiden under the sun. The old woman, however, had no other thought than how to lure mankind to destruction, and when a wooer appeared, she said that whosoever wished to have her daughter must first perform a task or die. Many had been dazzled by the daughter's beauty, and had actually risked this, but they could never accomplish what the old woman enjoined them to do. And then no mercy was shown. They had to kneel down, and their heads were struck off. A certain king's son, who had also heard of the maiden's beauty, said to his father, "Let me go there, I want to demand her in marriage." "Never," answered the king. "If you were to go, it would be going to your death." On this the son lay down and was so sick unto death, and for 7 years he lay there, and no physician could heal him. When the father perceived that all hope was over, with a heavy heart he said to him, "Go thither, and try your luck, for I know no other means of curing you." When the son heard that, he rose from his bed and was well again, and joyfully set out on his way. It came to pass that as he was riding across a heath, he saw from afar something like a great heap of hay lying on the ground, and when he drew nearer, he could see that it was the stomach of a man who had laid himself down there. The stomach looked like a small mountain. When the fat man saw the traveler, he stood up and said, "If you are in need of anyone, take me into your service." The prince answered, "What can I do with such a great big man?" "Oh," said the stout one, "this is nothing. When I stretch myself out well, I am 3,000 times fatter." "If that's the case," said the prince, "I can make use of you. Come with me." So the stout one followed the prince, and after a while they found another man who was lying on the ground with his ear laid to the turf. "What are you doing there?" asked the king's son. "I am listening," replied the man. "What are you listening to so attentively?" "I am listening to what it is just going on in the world, for nothing escapes my ears. I even hear the grass growing." "Tell me," said the prince, "what you hear at the court of the old queen who has the beautiful daughter." Then he answered, "I hear the whizzing of the sword that is striking off a wooer's head." The king's son said, "I can make use of you. Come with me." They went onwards, and they saw a pair of feet lying in a part and pair of legs, but could not see the rest of the body. When they had walked on for a great distance, they came to the body, and at last the head also. "Why," said the prince, "what a tall rascal you are." "Oh," replied the tall one, "that is nothing at all yet. When I really stretch out my limbs, I am 3,000 times as tall and taller than highest mountain on earth. I will gladly enter your service if you will take me. Come with me, said the prince. I can make use of you. They went onwards and found a man sitting by the road who had bound up his eyes. The prince said to him, Have you weak eyes that you cannot look at the light? No, replied the man, but I must not remove the bandage, for whatsoever I look at with my eyes splits to pieces. My glance is so powerful. If you can use that, I shall be glad to serve you. Come with me, replied the king's son. I can make use of you.
They journeyed onwards and found a man who was lying in the hot sunshine, trembling and shivering all over his body so that not a limb was still. How can you shiver when the sun is shining so warm? Said the king's son. Alack, replied the man, I am of quite a different nature. The hotter it is, the colder I am, and the frost pierces through all my bones. And the colder it is, the hotter I am. In the midst of ice, I cannot endure the heat, nor in the midst of fire the cold. You are a strange fellow, said the prince, but if you will enter my service, follow me. They traveled onwards and saw a man standing who made a long neck and looked around him and could see over all the mountains. What are you looking at so eagerly? Said the king's son. The man replied, I have such sharp eyes that I can see into every forest and field and hill and valley all over the world. The prince said, Come with me if you will, for I am still in want of such a one. Now the king's son and his 6 servants came to the town where the aged queen dwelt. He did not tell her who he was, but said, If you will give me your beautiful daughter, I will perform any task you set me. The sorceress was delighted to get such a handsome youth as this into her net, and said, I will set you 3 tasks, and if you are able to perform them all, you shall be husband and master of my daughter. What is the first to be? You shall fetch me my ring which I have dropped into the Red Sea. So the king's son went home to his servants and said, The first task is not easy. A ring is to be got out of the Red Sea. Come find some way of doing it. Then the man with sharp sight said, I will see where it is lying, and looked down into the water and said, It is sticking there on a pointed stone. The tall one carried them thither and said, I would soon get it out, if only I could see it. Oh, that is all, cried the stout one, and lay down and put his mouth to the water, on which all the waves fell into it just as if it had been a whirlpool. And he drank up the whole sea till it was dry as a meadow. The tall one stooped down a little, and brought out the ring with his hand. Then the king's son rejoiced when he had the ring, and took it to the old queen. She was astonished, and said,
Yes, it is the right ring. You have safely performed the first task, but now comes the second. Do you see the meadow in front of my palace? 300 fat oxen are feeding there, and these must you eat to skin, hair, bones, horns, and all. And down below in my cellar lie 300 casks of wine, and these you must drink up as well. And if one hair of the oxen or one drop of the wine is left, your life will be forfeited to me. May I invite no guest to this repast? Inquired the prince. No dinner is good without some company. The old woman laughed maliciously and replied, You may invite one for the sake of companionship, but no more. The king's son went to his servants and said to the stout one, You shall be my guest today, and shall eat your fill. Hereupon the stout one stretched himself out and ate up the 300 oxen without leaving one single hair. And then he asked if he was to have nothing but his breakfast. He drank the wine straight from the casks without feeling any need of a glass, and he licked the last drop from his fingernails. When the meal was over, the prince went to the old woman and told her that the second task was also performed. She wondered at this and said, No one has ever done so much before, but one task still remains. And she thought to herself, You shall not escape me, and will not keep your head on your shoulders. This night, said she, I will bring my daughter to you in your chamber, and you shall put your arms around her. But when you are sitting there together, beware of flying asleep. When 12 o'clock is striking, I will come, and if she is then no longer in your arms, you are lost. The prince thought, The task is easy. I will most certainly keep my eyes open. Nevertheless, he called his servants, told them what the old woman had said, and remarked, Who knows what treachery may lurk behind this? Foresight is a good thing. Keep watch, and take care that the maiden does not go out of my room again. When night fell, the old woman came with her daughter and gave her into the prince's arms. And then the tall one wound himself round the two in a circle, and the stout one placed himself by the doors so that no living creature could enter. There the two sat, and the maiden spake never a word. But what are these sentences? There the two sat, and the maiden spake never a word. But the moon shone through the window on her face, and the prince could behold her wondrous beauty. He did nothing but gaze at her, and was filled with love and happiness, and his eyes never felt weary. This lasted until 11 o'clock, when the old woman cast such a spell over all of them that they fell asleep, and at that self-same moment the maiden was carried away. Then they all slept soundly until 11:45, when the magic lost its power and all awoke again. "Oh, misery and misfortune," cried the prince. "Now I am lost." The faithful servants also began to lament, but the listener said,
"Be quiet, I want to listen." Then he listened for an instant and said, "She is on a rock, 300 leagues from hence, bewailing her fate. You alone, tall one, can help her. If you will stand up, you will be there in a couple of steps." "Yes," answered the tall one, "but the one with the sharp eyes must go with me, that we may destroy the rock." And the tall one took the one with the bandaged eyes on his back, and in the twinkling of an eye, we were there on the enchanted rock. The tall one immediately took the bandage from the other's eye, and he did not look round, and the rock shivered into thousands of pieces. Then the tall one took the maiden in his arms, carried her back in a second, then fetched his companion with the same rapidity. And before it struck 12, they were all sitting as they had sat before, quite merrily and happily. When 12 struck, the aged sorceress came stealing in with a malicious face, which seemed to say, "Now he is mine." For she believed that her daughter was on the rock 300 leagues off. But when she saw her in the prince's arms, she was alarmed and said, "Here is one who knows more than I do." She dared not make any opposition, and was forced to give him her daughter. But she whispered in her ear,
"It is a disgrace to you to have to obey common people, and that you are not allowed to choose a husband to your own liking."
At this the proud heart of the maiden was filled with anger, and she meditated revenge. Next morning she caused 300 great bundles of wood to be got together, and said to the prince that though the 3 tasks were performed, she would still not be his wife until someone was ready to seat himself in the midst of the wood and bear the fire. She thought that none of his servants would let themselves be burnt for him, and that out of love for her he himself would place himself upon it, and then she would be free. But the servants said, "Every one of us has done something except the frosty one. He must set to work." And they put him in the middle of the pile and set fire to it. Then the fire began to burn, and burned for 3 days, until all the wood was consumed. And when the flames had burned out, the frosty one was standing amid the ashes, trembling like an aspen leaf, and saying, "I never felt such a frost during the whole course of my life. If it had lasted much longer, I should have been benumbed." As no other pretext was to be found, the beautiful maiden was now forced to take the unknown youth as husband. But when they drove away to church, the old woman said, "I cannot endure this disgrace," and sent her warriors after them with orders to cut down all who opposed them and bring her daughter back. But the listener had sharpened his ears and heard the secret discourse of the old woman. "What shall we do?" said he to the stout one. But he knew what to do, and spat out once or twice behind the carriage some of the sea water which he had drunk, and a great sea arose in which the warriors were caught and drowned. When the sorceress perceived that, she sent her mailed knights, but the listener heard the rattling of their armor, and undid the bandage from the one eye of Sharp Eyes, who looked for a while rather fixedly at the enemy's troops, on which they all sprang to pieces like glass. Then the youth and the maiden went on their way undisturbed, and when the 2 had been blessed in church, the 6 servants took leave, and said to their master, "Your wishes are now satisfied. You need us no longer. We will go our way and seek our fortunes." Half a league from the palace of the prince's father was a village, near which a swineherd tended his herd, and when they came thither the prince said to his wife, "Do you know who I really am? I am no prince, but a herder of swine, and the man who is there with that herd is my father. We 2 shall have to set to work also and help him." Then he alighted with her at the inn, and secretly told the innkeepers to take away her royal apparel during the night. So when she awoke in the morning, she had nothing to put on, and the innkeeper's wife gave her an old gown and a pair of worsted of worsted stockings, and at the same time seemed to consider it all a great present, and said, "If it were not for the sake of your husband, I should have given you nothing at all." Then the princess believed that he really was a swineherd, and tended the herd with him, and thought to herself, "I have deserved this for my haughtiness and pride." This lasted for a week, and then she could endure it no longer, for she had sores on her feet, and now came a couple of people who asked her if she knew who her husband was. "Yes," she answered, "he is a swineherd, and he has just gone out with the cords and ropes to try to dive a little bargain." But they said, "Just come with us, and we will take you to him." And they took her to the palace, and when she entered the hall, there stood her husband in kingly raiment. But she did not recognize him until he took her in his arms, kissed her, and said, "I suffered much for you, and now you too will have to suffer for me." Then the wedding was celebrated, and he who told you all this wishes that he too had been present at it. Alright, maybe 6 is a common theme because now we're on to the 6 soldiers of fortune. There was once a man who was a jack of all trades. He had served in the war and had been brave and bold, but at the end of it he was sent about his business with 3 farthings in his discharge. "I am not going to stand this," said he. "Wait till I find the right man to help me, and the king shall give me all the treasures of his kingdom before he has done with me." Then, full of wrath, he went into the forest, and he saw one standing there by 6 trees which he had rooted up as if they had been stalks of corn. And he said to him, "Will you be my man and come along with me?" "All right," answered he. "I must just take this bit of wood home to my father and mother." And taking one of the trees, he bound it round the other 5, and putting it on his shoulder, he carried it off. Then soon coming back, he went along with his leader, who said, "Two such as we can stand against the whole world." And when they had gone a bit while, they came to a huntsman who was kneeling on one knee and taking careful aim with his rifle. There's a lot of huntsmen in these nursery rhymes. "Huntsman," said the leader, "what are you aiming at?" 2 miles from here," answered he, "there sits a fly on a bough of an oak tree. I mean to put a bullet into its left eye." "Oh, come along with me," said the leader. "3 of us together can stand against the world." The huntsman was quite willing to go with him, and so they went on till they came to 7 windmills, whose sails were going round briskly, and yet there was no wind blowing from any quarter, and not a leaf stirred. "Well," said the leader, "I cannot think what ails the windmills, turning without wind." And he went on with his followers about 2 miles farther, and then came to a man sitting up in a tree, holding one nostril and blowing with the other. "Now then," said the leader, "what are you going to do up there?" 2 miles from here," answered he, "there are 7 windmills. I am blowing, and they are going round." "Oh, go with me," cried the leader. 4 of us together can stand against the world." So the blower got down and went with them, and after a time they came to a man standing on one leg, and the other had been taken off and was lying near him. "You seem to have got a handy way of resting yourself," said the leader to the man. "I am a runner," answered he, "and in order to keep myself from going too fast, I have taken off a leg, for when I run with both, I go faster than a bird can fly." "Oh, go with me," cried the leader. 5 of us together may well stand against the world." So he went with them all together, and it was not long before they met a man with a little hat on, and he wore it just over one ear. "Manners, manners," said the leader. "With your hat like that, you look like a jack fool." "I dare not put it straight," answered the other. "If I did, there would be such a terrible frost that the very birds would be frozen and fall dead from the sky to the ground." "Oh, come with me," said the leader. "We 6 together may well stand against the world." So the 6 went on together until they came to a town where the king had caused it to be made known that whoever would run a race with his daughter and win it must become her husband, but that whoever lost must lose his head into the bargain. And the leader came forward and said, "Sorry, it's just that this is the exact same thing as the previous story, I'm pretty sure. Let me just get me here. Well, whatever, whatever, who cares?" Then said the king, "His life two must be put in pledge, and if he fails, his head and yours too must fall. When this was quite settled and agreed upon, the leader called the runner and strapped his second leg on to him. Now look out, said he, and take care what we win. It had been agreed that the one who should bring water first from a far distant brook should be accounted winner. Now the king's daughter and the runner each took a pitcher, and they started both at the same time. But in one moment, when the king's daughter had gone but a very little way, the runner was out of sight, for his running was as if the wind rushed by. In a short time he reached the brook, filled his pitcher full of water, and turned back again. About halfway home, however, he was overcome with weariness, and setting down his pitcher, he lay down on the ground to sleep. But in order to awaken soon again, by not lying too soft, he had taken a horse's skull which lay near and placed it under his head for a pillow. In the meanwhile, the king's daughter, who really was a good runner, good enough to beat an ordinary man, had reached the brook and filled her pitcher, and was hastening with it back again, when she saw the runner lying asleep. "The day is mine," said she with much joy, and she emptied his pitcher and hastened on. And now all had been lost but for the huntsman, who was standing on the castle wall, and with his keen eyes saw all that happened. "We must not be outdone by the king's daughter," said he, and he loaded his rifle and took so good an aim that he shot the horse's skull from under the runner's head without doing him any harm. And the runner awoke and jumped up and saw his pitcher standing empty, and the king's daughter far off on her way home. But, not losing courage, he ran swiftly to the brook, filled it again with water, and for all that he got home 10 minutes before the king's daughter. "Look you," said he, "this is the first time I have really stretched my legs. Before it was not worth the name of running." The king was vexed, and his daughter yet more so, that she should be beaten by a discharged common soldier, and they took counsel together how they might rid themselves of him and his companions at the same time. "I have a plan," said the king. "Do not fear, but that we shall be quit of them forever." Then he went out to the men and bade them to feast and be merry and eat and drink, and he led them into a room which had a floor of iron, and the doors were iron, the windows had iron frames and bolts, and the rooms with the tables set out with costly food. "Now, go in there and make yourselves comfortable," said the king. And when they had gone back in, he had the door locked and bolted. Then he called the cook and told him to make a big fire underneath the room, so that the iron floor of it should be red hot. And the cook did so, and the 6 men began to feel the room grow very warm, by reason, as they thought at first, of the good dinner. But as the heat grew greater and greater, and they found the doors and the windows fastened, they began to think it was an evil plan of the king's to suffocate them. "He shall not succeed, however," said the man with the little hat. "I will bring on a frost that shall make the fire feel ashamed of itself, and creep out of the way." So he set his hat straight on his head, and immediately there came such a frost that all the heat passed away, and the food froze in the dishes. After an hour or 2 had passed, and the king thought they must have all perished in the heat, he caused the floor to be opened, and went himself to see how they fared. And when the door flew back, there they were, all 6 quite safe and sound, and they said they were quite ready to come out, so that they might warm themselves, for the great cold of that room had caused the food to freeze in the dishes. Full of wrath, the king went to the cook and scolded him, and asked why he had not done as he was ordered. "It is hot enough here, you may see for yourself," answered the cook. And the king looked and saw an immense fire burning underneath the room of iron, and he began to think that the 6 men were not to be got rid of in that way. And he thought of a new plan by which it might be managed, so he sent for the leader and said to him, "If you will give up your right to my daughter, and take gold instead, you may have as much as you like." "Certainly, my lord king," answered the man. "Let me have as much gold as my servant can carry, and I give up all claim to your daughter." And the king agreed that he should come again in a fortnight to fetch the gold. The man then called together all the tailors in the kingdom, and set them to work to make a sack, and it took them a fortnight. And when it was ready, the strong man who had been found rooting up the trees took it on his shoulder and went to the king. "Who is this immense fellow carrying on his shoulder a bundle of stuff as big as a house?" cried the king, terrified to think how much gold he would carry off. And a ton of gold was dragged by, and 16 strong men, but he put it all into the sack with one hand, saying, "Why don't you bring some more? This hardly covers the bottom." So the king bade them fetch by degrees the whole of his treasure, and even then the sack was not half full. "Bring more," cried the man. "These few scraps go no way at all." Then at last 7,000 wagons laden with gold collected through the whole kingdom were driven up, and he threw them in a sack, oxen and all. "I will not look too closely," said he, "but take what I can get, so long as the sack is full." And when all this was put in, there was still plenty of room. "I must make an end of this," he said. "If it is not full, it is so much the easier to tie up." And he hoisted it on his back and went off with his comrades. When the king saw all the wealth of his realm carried off by a single man, he was full of wrath, and he bade his cavalry mount and follow after the 6 men, and take the sack away from the strong man. 2 regiments were soon up to them, and called them to consider themselves prisoners, and to deliver up the sack, or to be cut in pieces. "Prisoners, say you?" said the man who could blow. "Suppose you first have a little dance together in the air." And holding one nostril, and blowing through the other, he sent the regiments flying head over heels, over the hills and far away. But a sergeant who had 9 wounds and was a brave fellow begged not to be put to so much shame, and the blower let him down easily, said he came to no harm. And he bade him go to the king and tell him that whatever regiments he liked to send more should be blown away just the same. And the king, when he got the message, said, "Let the fellows be, they have some right on their side." So the 6 comrades carried home their treasure, divided it among them, and lived contented till they died.
The 2 travelers. A shoemaker and a tailor once met with each other in their travels. The tailor was a handsome little fellow who was always merry and full of enjoyment. He saw the shoemaker coming towards him from the other side, and as he observed by his bag what kind of trade he plied, he sang a little mocking song to him.
"Sew me the seam, draw me the thread, spread it over the pitch, knock the nail on the head."
The shoemaker, however, could not endure a joke. He pulled a face as if he had drunk vinegar, and made a gesture as if he were about to seize the tailor by the throat. But the little fellow began to laugh, reached his bottle, and said no harm was meant. "Take a drink and swallow thy anger down." The shoemaker took a very hearty drink, and the storm on his face began to clear away. He gave the bottle back to the tailor, and said, "I spoke civilly to thee. One speaks well after much drinking, but not after much thirst. Shall we travel together?" "All right," answered the tailor, "if only it suits thee to go into a big town where there is no lack of work." "That is just where I want to go," answered the shoemaker. "In a small nest there is nothing to earn, and in the country people like to go barefoot." They traveled therefore onwards together, and always set one foot before the other like a weasel in the snow. Both of them had time enough, but little to bite and to break. When they reached a town, they went about and paid their respects to the tradesmen, and because the tailor looked so lively and merry, and had such pretty red cheeks, everyone gave him work willingly. And when luck was good, and the master's daughters gave him a kiss beneath the porch as well, when he again fell ill with the shoemaker, and tailor had always the most in his bundle, the ill-tempered shoemaker made a wry face and thought, "The greater the rascal, the more the luck." But the tailor began to laugh and to sing, and shared all he got with his comrade. If a couple of pence jingled in his pockets, he ordered good cheer, and thumped the table in his joy till the glasses danced, and it was lightly come, lightly go with him. When they had traveled for some time, they came to a great forest through which passed the road to the capital. 2 footpaths, however, had led through it, one of which was a 7 days' journey, and the other only 2, but neither of the travelers knew which way was the short one. They seated themselves beneath an oak tree, and took counsel together how they should forecast and for how many days they should provide themselves with bread. The shoemaker said, "One must look before one leaps. I will take with me bread for a week." "What?" said the tailor. "Drag bread for 7 days on one's back like a beast of burden, and not be able to look about. I shall trust in God, and not trouble myself about anything. The money I have in my pocket is as good in summer as in winter, but in hot weather bread gets dry and moldy into the bargain. Even my coat does not go as far as it might. Besides, why should we not find the right way? Bread for 2 days, and that's enough." Each, therefore, brought his own bread, and then they tried their luck in the forest. It was as quiet there as in a church. No wind stirred, no brook murmured, no bird sang, and through the thickly leaved branches no sunbeam forced its way. The shoemaker spoke never a word. The heavy bread weighed down his back until the perspiration streamed down his cross and gloomy face. The tailor, however, was quite merry. He jumped about, whistled on the leaf, or sang a song, and thought to himself, "God in heaven must be pleased to see me so happy." This lasted 2 days, but on the third the forest would not come to an end, and the tailor had eaten up all his bread. So after all, his heart sank down a yard deeper. In the meantime, he did not lose courage, but relied on God and on his luck. On the 3rd day, he lay down in the evening, hungry, under a tree, and rose again next morning hungry still. So also passed the 4th day, and when the shoemaker seated himself on a fallen tree and devoured his dinner, the tailor was only a looker-on. If he begged for a little piece of bread, the other laughed mockingly and said, "Thou hast always been so merry. Now thou canst try for once what it is to be sad." The birds which sing too early in the morning are struck by the hawk in the evening. In short, he was pitiless. But on the 5th morning the poor tailor could no longer stand up, and was hardly able to utter one word for weakness. His cheeks were white and his eyes red. Then the shoemaker said to him, "I will give thee a bit of bread today, but in return for it I will put out thy right eye." The unhappy tailor, who still wished to save his life, could not do it any other way. He wept once more as with both eyes, and then held them out. But the shoemaker, who had a heart of stone, put out his right eye with a sharp knife. The tailor remembered what his mother had formerly said to him when he had been eating secretly in the pantry. "Eat what one can, and suffer what one must." When he had consumed his dearly bought bread, he got on his legs again, forgot his misery, and comforted himself with the thought that he could always see enough with one eye. But on the 6th day, hunger made itself felt again, and he gnawed him about almost to the heart. In the evening he fell down by a tree, and on the 7th morning he could not raise himself up for faintness, and death was close at hand. Then said the shoemaker, "I will show mercy, and give thee bread once more, but thou shalt not have it for nothing. I shall put out thy other eye for it."
And now the tailor felt how thoughtless his life had been, prayed to God for forgiveness, and said, "Do what thou wilt. I will bear what I must, but remember that our Lord God does not always look on passively, and that an hour will come when the evil deed which thou hast done to me, and which I have not deserved of thee, will be requited. When times were good with me, I shared what I had with thee. My trade is of the kind that each stitch must always be exactly like the other. If I no longer have my eyes, and can sew no more, I must go a-begging. At any rate, do not leave me here alone when I am blind, or I shall die of hunger." The shoemaker, however, who had driven God out of his heart, took the knife and put out his left eye. Then he gave him a bit of bread to eat, held out a stick to him, and drew him on behind him. When the sun went down, they got out of the forest, and before them in the open country stood the gallows. Thither the shoemaker guided the blind tailor, and then left him alone and went his way. Weariness, pain, and hunger made the wretched man fall asleep, and he slept the whole night. When the day dawned, he awoke, but knew not where he lay. 2 poor sinners were hanging on the gallows, and a crow sat on the head of each of them. Then one of the men who had been hanged began to speak, and said, Brother, art thou awake? Yes, I am awake, answered the second. Then I will tell thee something, said the first. The dew which this night has fallen down over us from the gallows gives everyone who washes himself with it his eyes again. If blind people did not know how this would regain their sight, who do not believe that to be possible? When the tailor heard that, he took his pocket handkerchief, pressed it on the grass, and when it was moist with dew, washed the sockets of his eyes with it. Immediately was fulfilled what the man on the gallows had said, and a couple of healthy new eyes filled the sockets. It was not long before the tailor saw the sun rise behind the mountains, and in the plain before him lay the great royal city with its magnificent gates and 100 towers, and the golden balls and crosses which were on the spires began to shine. He could distinguish every leaf on the trees, saw the birds which flew past, and the midges which danced in the air. He took a needle out of his pocket, and as he could thread it well as he ever had done, his heart danced with delight. He threw himself on his knees, thanked God for the mercy he had shown him, and said his morning prayer. He did not forget also to pray for the poor sinners who were hanging there, swinging against each other in the wind like the pendulums of clocks. Then he took his bundle on his back, and soon forgot the pain of heart he had endured, and went on his way, singing and whistling. The first thing he met was a brown foal running about the fields at large. He caught it by the mane, and wanted to spring on it and ride into town. The foal, however, begged to be set free. I am still too young, it said. Even a light tailor such as thou art would break my back in two. Let me go till I have grown strong. A time may perhaps come when I may reward thee for it. Run off, said the tailor. I see thou art still a giddy thing. He gave it a touch with a switch over its back, whereupon it kicked up its hind legs for joy, leapt over hedges and ditches, and galloped away, far out into the open country. But the little tailor had eaten nothing since the day before. The sun, to be sure, fills my eyes, said he, but the bread does not fill my mouth. The first thing that comes across me and is even half edible will have to suffer for it. In the meantime, a stork stepped solemnly over the meadow towards him. Halt, halt, cried the tailor, and seized him by the leg. I don't know if thou art any good to eat or not, but my hunger leaves me no great choice. I must cut thy head off and roast thee. Don't do that, replied the stork. I am a sacred bird, which brings mankind great profit, and no one does me an injury. Leave me my life, and I may do thee good in some other way. Well be off, cousin Longlegs, said the tailor. The stork rose up, let its long legs hang down, and flew gently away. What's to be the end of this? Said the tailor to himself at last. My hunger grows greater and greater, and my stomach more and more empty. Whatsoever comes in my way now is lost. At this moment he saw a couple of young ducks which were on the pond come swimming towards him. You come just at the right moment, said he, and laid hold of one of them and was about to wring its neck. On this an old duck, which was hidden among the reeds, began to scream loudly, and swam to him with open beak, and begged him urgently to spare her dear children. Canst thou not imagine, said she, how thy mother would mourn if anyone wanted to carry thee off, and give thee thy finishing stroke? Only be quiet, said the good-tempered tailor. Thou shalt keep thy children, and put the prisoner back into the water. When he turned round, he saw standing in front of an old tree, which was partly hollow, and saw some wild bees flying in and out. There I shall at once find the reward of my good deed, said the tailor. The honey will refresh me. But the queen bee came out, threatened him, and said, If thou touchest my people and destroyest my nest, her sting shall pierce thy skin 10,000 red-hot needles. But if thou wilt lead us in peace and go thy way, we will do thee a service for it another time. The little tailor saw that here was also nothing to be done. 3 dishes empty and nothing on the 4th is a bad dinner. He dragged himself therefore with his starved-out stomach into the town, and as it was just striking 12, all was ready cooked for him in the inn, and he was able to sit down at once to dinner. When he was satisfied, he said, Now I will get to work. He went around the town,
sought a master, and soon was in a good situation. As, however, he had thoroughly learned his trade, it was not long before he became famous, and everyone wanted to have his new coat made for the little tailor, whose importance increased daily. I can go no further in skill, said he, and yet things improve every day. At last the king appointed him court tailor. But how things do happen in the world! On the very same day, his former comrade, the shoemaker, also became court shoemaker. When the latter caught sight of the tailor and saw that he had once more 2 healthy eyes, his conscience troubled him. Before he takes revenge on me, thought he to himself, I must dig a pit for him. He, however, who digs a pit for another, falls into it himself. In the evening, when work was over and it had grown dusk, he stole to the king and said, Lord King, the tailor is an arrogant fellow and has boasted that he will get the gold crown back again, which is lost in ancient times. That would please me very much, said the king. And he caused the tailor to be brought before him next morning and ordered him to get the crown back again, or to leave for town forever. Oh, thought the tailor, a rogue gives more than he gets got. If the surly king wants me to do what he can done by no one, I will not wait till morning, but will go out of town at once today. He packed up his bundle, therefore, but when he was without the gate, he could not help being sorry to give up his good fortune, and turn his back on the town in which all had gone so well with him. He came to the pond where he had made the acquaintance of the ducks. At that very moment, the old one whose young ones had spared was sitting there by the shore, pluming herself with her beak. She knew him again instantly, and asked why he was hanging his head so. That will not be surprised when thou hearest what has befallen me, replied the tailor, and told her his fate. If that be all, said the duck, we can help thee. The crown fell into the water and lies down below the bottom. We will soon bring it up again for thee. In the meantime, just spread out thy handkerchief on the bank. She dived down with her 12 young ones, and in 5 minutes she was up again, and sat with the crown resting on her wings. And the 12 young ones were swimming around about and had put their beaks under it, and were helping carry it. They swam to the shore, and put the crown on the handkerchief. No one can imagine how magnificent the crown was, but the sun shone on it, gleamed like 100,000 carbuncles. The tailor tied his handkerchief together with the 4 corners, and carried it to the king, who was full of joy, and put a gold chain round the tailor's neck.
When the shoemaker saw that one stroke had failed, he contrived a second, and went to the king, and said, Lord King, the tailor has become insolent again. He boasts that he will copy and wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertains to it, loose or fast, inside and out. The king sent for the tailor, and ordered him to copy and wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertained to it, movable or immovable, within and without. And if he did not succeed in doing this, if so much as much nail on the wall were wanting, he should be imprisoned for his whole life underground. The tailor thought, it gets worse and worse. No one can endure that, and threw his bundle on his back and went forth. When he came to the hollow tree, he sat down and hung his head. The bees came flying out, and the queen bee asked him if he had a stiff neck since he had held his head so awry. Alas, no, answered the tailor. Something quite different weighs me down, and he told her what the king had demanded of him. The bees began to buzz and hum among themselves, and the queen bee said, Just go home, but come back tomorrow at this time, and bring a large sheet with thee, and then all will be well. So we turned back again, but the bees flew to the royal palace and straight through the open windows, crept round into every corner, and inspected everything most carefully. Then they hurried back and modeled the place in wax with such rapidity that anyone looking on it would have thought it was growing before his eyes. By the evening, all was ready, and when the tailor came next morning, the whole of the splendid building was there, and not one nail in the wall or tile on the roof was wanting. And it was delicate withal, and white as snow, and smelled sweet as honey. The tailor wrapped it carefully in his cloth, and took it to the king, who could not admire it enough, placed it in his largest hall, and in return for it presented the tailor with a large stone house. The shoemaker, however, did not give up, but went for the 3rd time to the king and said, Lord King, if it has come to the tailor's ears that no water will spring up in the courtyard of the castle, he has boasted that it shall rise up in the middle of the courtyard to a man's height and be clear as crystal. Then the king ordered the tailor to be brought before him and said, "If a stream of water does not rise up in my courtyard by tomorrow, as thou had promised, the executioner shall be in that very place. Make thee shorter by the head." The poor tailor did not take long to think about it, but hurried out to the gate, and because this time it was a matter of life and death to him, tears rolled down his face. While he was thus going forth of sorrow, the foal to which he had formerly given its liberty, and which had now become a beautiful chestnut horse, came leaping towards him. "The time is come," it said to the tailor, "when I can repay thee for thy good deed. I know already what is needed to thee, but thou shalt soon have help. Get on me, my back can carry two such as thou." The tailor's courage came back to him. He jumped in one bound, and the horse went full speed into the town, and right up to the courtyard of the castle, and galloped as quick as lightning thrice round it, and the third time it fell violently down. At the same instant, however, there was a terrific clap of thunder. A fragment of air in the middle of the courtyard sprang like a cannonball into the air, and over the castle, and directly after it a jet of water rose as high as a man on horseback, and the water was as pure as crystal, and the sunbeams began to dance on it. When the king saw that, he arose in amazement, and went and embraced the tailor in the sight of all men. But good fortune did not last long. The king had daughters in plenty, one prettier than the other, but he had no sons. So the malicious shoemaker betook himself for the fourth time to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor has not given up his arrogance. He has now boasted that if he liked he could cause a son to be brought to the Lord King through the air." The king commanded the tailor to be summoned and said, "If thou causest a son to be brought to me within 9 days, thou shalt have my eldest daughter to wife." "The reward is indeed great," thought the little tailor. "One would willingly do something for it, but the cherries grow too high for me. If I climb for them, the bough will break beneath me and I shall fall." He went home, seated himself cross-legged on his work table, and thought what was to be done. "It can't be managed," cried he at last. "I will go away. After all, I can't live in peace here." He tied up his bundle and hurried away to the gate. When he got to the meadow, he perceived his old friend the stork, who was walking backwards and forwards like a philosopher. Sometimes he stood still, took a frog into close consideration, and at length swallowed it down. The stork came to him and greeted him. "I see," he began, "that thou hast thy pack on thy back. Why art thou leaving the town?" The tailor told him what the king had required of him, and how he could not perform it, and lamented his misfortune. "Don't let thy hair grow gray about that," said the stork. "I will help thee out of thy difficulty. For a long time now I have carried the children in swaddling clothes into the town, so for once in a way I can fetch a little prince out of the well. Go home and be easy. In 9 days from this time repair to the royal palace, and there I will come." The little tailor went home, and at the appointed time was at the castle. It was not long before the stork came flying thither and tapped at the window. The tailor opened it, and Cousin Longlegs came carefully in, and walked with solemn steps over the smooth marble pavement. He had, however, a baby in his beak that was as lovely as an angel, and stretched out its little hand to the queen. The stork laid it in her lap, and she caressed it and kissed it, and was beside herself with delight. Before the stork flew away, he took his traveling bag off his back and handed it over to the queen. In it there were little paper parcels with sweet sweetmeats, and they were divided among the little princesses. The eldest, however, had none of them, but got the merry tailor for a husband. "It seems to me," said he, "just as if I had won the highest prize. My mother was right after all. She always said that whoever trusts in God and only has good luck can never fail." The shoemaker had to make the shoes in which the little tailor danced at the wedding festival, after which he was commanded to quit the town forever. The road to the forest led him to the gallows. Worn out with anger, rage, and the heat of the day, he threw himself down. When he had closed his eyes and was about to sleep, the 2 crows flew down from the heads of the men who were hanging there and pecked his eyes out. In his madness he ran into the forest and must have died there of hunger, for no one has ever seen of him or heard of him again.
All right, that was a long one. And this next one seems pretty short, and it is called The Ear of Corn, which reminds me of the Cornspiracy I am a part of. So let's just read this little thing. The Ear of Corn. In former times, when God... Actually, let me correct myself. I'm not a part of the Cornspiracy. I actually left the Cornspiracy. I dropped out. So yeah, forget corn. Screw corn. I hate corn. Anyway, the year of corn. In former times, when God himself still walked the earth, the fruitfulness of the soil was much greater than it is now. Then the ears of corn did not bear 50 or 60, but 400 or 500 fold. Then the corn grew from the bottom to the very top of the stalk, and according to the length of the stalk was the length of the ear. Men, however, are so made that when they are too well off, they no longer value the blessings which come from God, but grow indifferent and careless. One day a woman was passing by a cornfield when her little child, who was running beside her, fell into a puddle and dirtied her frock. On this the mother tore up a handful of the beautiful ears of corn and cleaned the frock with them. And the Lord, who just then came by, saw that. He was angry and said, Henceforth shall the stalks of corn no more ears. Men are no longer worthy of heavenly gifts. The bystanders who heard this were terrified and fell on their knees and prayed that he would still leave something on the stalks, even if the people were undeserving of it, for the sake of the innocent birds who would otherwise have to starve. The Lord, who foresaw their suffering, had pity on them and granted their request. So the ears were left, and as they now grow. Alright, that was simple enough. I think my voice is completely shot, so I'm just gonna run out of here. And once again, you have been listening to M. Price. This is M. Price Can Read. I can certainly read, just not for long periods.